I dare you to take a shot every time someone says, evil dies tonight. I guarantee you, you will die of alcohol poisoning immediately. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already and you like what you see here, like, share, subscribe to the channel, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. It's going to be non-spoilery here, guys, but I mean, truthfully, with a horror movie, specifically Halloween, you know what happens. So there's really not much I can spoil. Michael murders a lot of people. So this film picks up right after the last Halloween, which fucking titles. Like, it's hard to say Halloween because the original was also called Halloween. But this one picks up right after the previous film with a bit of a left turn or a detour, if you will. This movie, outside of probably the Saw series, this movie relies very heavily on the previous two films. And I'm just referring to the stuff that is now canon to this series, which is the original film, the previous film with Judy Greer, and then this one. All of that is sort of canon, and this basically tries to tie all in that stuff together, and it has a opening 15 to 20ish minutes that deals with previous events in the 70s era of the original time that Michael Myers went apeshit, and sort of ties in all that together. We get some old footage spliced in with some recreated footage spliced in, and it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. I think this film would have done or serviced a little bit better had it just picked up right after. You would have gotten to the energy a little bit more. It makes the first act of this film feel real herky-jerky because we're stopping and starting and kind of going from one perspective to another and going from the past to the future. It's not clean in any way. Once we get out of that, the movie does pick up for me. The back half of this movie is infinitely better than the front half of this flick. For those of you who wanted the body count to be higher, you've gotten your wish. This is significantly higher than body count in the previous two films combined. I mean, Michael murdered a lot of people in this go round. You got to think about it. The first time that he was here, he didn't really get that many people. He attempted to, but he did not kill that many people. This film sort of retros that a bit. Some people that you thought were gone aren't quite. In the last film, he doesn't really kill that many people. There's some specific things here and there, but he doesn't murder a lot of people. However, like the previous film, they don't hold much weight. He's killing just superfluous people that don't really mean much, and that's sort of just how horror movies go. I think why some characters like Freddy or Chucky or Jason Jason to a lesser degree, work a little bit better. Than some of the times that the kills that they have, they spend a little bit of time with those people, so you as an audience, character-wise, get to know them a little bit, so you care more when they die. There's these people here. You meet them for 5 minutes. You get some characteristics, so you see a caricature of a person, and you're like, okay, cool, they're dead, cool. But there are some very, very violent and gory deaths here. So if you're a horror fan and you want to see some gory deaths, this is where it's at. Unfortunately, sometimes I think we get so much of that gore that about probably the halfway mark, I sort of become desensitized to it. I'm like, oh, wow, that person's really gruesome. And I think not always less is more, but I think if you time it and don't always go for the gore, like this movie goes from the gore from start to finish, and so by the time you're at the end, you're like, you can no longer show me as more blood than you could possibly do, which is a shame because I think the impact for these would, if you tapered them off, would have made a lot more of a punch in the back half of the film if you held on to some of that. I think with the use of the gore and the higher body count, and then with the splicing in of the previous film, this movie is doing everything humanly possible to sort of hide that there is no script here. Like there's this entry into the franchise, into this new trilogy, plus the one, is very hollow. It's very weak. It is relying a lot on past and sort of putting everything together, but it in itself, there's really not much that moves the needle franchise-wise for this series here. It is very much, let's throw as much blood as we possibly can on the screen, and hopefully you enjoy it. That's what you're here for. If you want a little bit more meat on the bones, or to get some more explanation or experience why things are happening, you don't really get any of that with Halloween Kills. There is a wild subplot in this movie that comes off a lot funnier than I think they ever intended for it to. One of the survivors of the previous film, Tommy, is brought back here as an adult form, and he's with another list of survivors from the previous Michael Myers attempt in the first film. And they are all sort of survivors. They meet every Halloween and sort of drink up and whatnot. Here, they are a legacy group, and they sort of tell the story every year to kind of let the audience and let the townspeople know what's going on. Works as a twofold. But there's a lot of anger and hate and fear in those folks, and he gets these people, he gets other people, he gets people in the hospital sort of riled up, and so we get into the situation where this town sort of becomes a mob, and their fear and hatred of what Michael Myers has always been doing to this town, this sort of shadow that is veiled over this town has always existed. They are more intense, and they basically become a version of the villain themselves. And so we get in this weird thing where in a better film, better handled, better told story, I think the concept or conceit that some of these folks have taken things so far in their vigilante justice that they have themselves become the villain, I think it could work in better hands. Here, it is very campy and hokey. At times it feels like a comedy. I don't know what I'm watching. The phrase of the saying, "evil dies tonight," was said so many times that I think my eyes may have done about 7 complete rolls in my head, how many times I was turning them. That's how annoying that became after a while. There's just got to be something else that can be said to kind of get your point across. I get the messaging, and that's probably the one thing that they were trying to do, but they built this entire framework around that, and it just sort of falls apart for me. That is not to say that this film is not good. It is not great. I did not enjoy it more than the previous entry. I like that entry much better than this, and I think depending on what you go to Halloween for, if you go for body count or blood and all that stuff, this is probably going to be more your bag. If you're more into story and kind of how we're seeing old man Michael kind of descend and go back to what he knows, that one makes more sense. The previous one makes more sense for you. It is a little hard for me to rate this film because it is the middle chapter of whatever we're getting on the back end, and I'm not going to go into spoilers of what happens here, but there is a cliffhanger, and so it is difficult for me to put a rating on this. It is definitely less than the first film, but I think this movie is the one that is very dependent on the first 2 films and whatever happens in this last film to sort of give it an accurate picture. I think, yes, you absolutely should, and probably will get lost if you don't watch the previous 2 films before this. This is the first time in a while, probably outside of the Saw movies, they just get very entangled. But I think you do need to have done the homework and seen the previous films pretty recently. Whereas I don't think that always happens with a lot of horror films. On my scale of once is enough, play it again, Sam, give me a time stone. This is a once is enough. I don't really enjoy this movie as much as I did the previous. It picks up in the back half of the film, but there's some moments that just make your eyes roll. I would say that when it is all said and done, I think I care more about the final film that we get in this trilogy and sort of what they have suggested that Michael Myers sort of becomes, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all sort of pays off in the final film. We don't have much time to wait. Halloween Ends comes out next year, so it will be interesting to see if this film gets better as it goes on, once we get everything where this sort of fits. But right now, this fits in that once is enough. I do think that rating could go up once we get the totality of the story. But right now, this is in that weird spot where it should handle more groundwork than it does story-wise, but it doesn't. There's no real movement franchise-wise. No characters will really grow or change too much in this. But I think it's sort of just that one piece to sort of satiate the appetite of fans to just go balls out bloody. Whereas the first one in this trilogy establish Michael and put sort of the people back on the board. This one was just like the bloodbath, and I think we'll slow down for this third one. It'll become more of a mano a mano, almost like a horror western type of thing. At least I hope. I hope the body count does not go try to top this because this film is a lot. I wanted to kind of come back down and get back to a character moment because for me, the horror that I enjoy is when it gets into the character pieces a little bit more than, well, actually a lot more than this film does. What were your thoughts on Halloween Kills? Do you like this one more than the previous, or where does this sort of rank so far in your the new Halloween canon, not the old stuff? We don't have to worry about any of the sequels or the Rob Zombie stuff, but just out of these three films, which is your favorite? Go ahead and leave your comments and thoughts below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We have a podcast with the same name that's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any other place podcasts. We're there. We will probably be going a little bit more into depth about this particular sequel on our podcast and getting into spoilers there. I won't get into any of that here. But like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.